Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Genealogy Kickstart series. In today's lesson, we'll look at how to begin searching for online records. There are many different websites available when looking for genealogical records. Two of the largest are Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org. You've probably heard of Ancestry because of all of the television commercials that they have. This is a great source for finding online records. However, it does have a rather pricey subscription. Luckily, many libraries have subscriptions to Ancestry that allow you to search for free in the library using their public computers or their wireless network. This is a great way to get used to Ancestry and try it out and to see what records they have available before you decide whether or not it's worth it to you to pay for a home subscription. Just keep in mind that when you're searching, if you don't find a record that you expect to find, it doesn't necessarily mean that Ancestry doesn't have it. The library version has less than half of the record sets available that the home version does. So again, that's something to keep in mind when you're deciding whether or not to pay for a home subscription. FamilySearch.org is the next large source for genealogical records. Unlike Ancestry, however, it is free. These are provided by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they make it freely available to anybody who wishes to search their records. Another site is AmericanAncestors.org. This is a subscription site for the New England Historic Genealogical Society. This is a great source for finding particularly New England records. FindMyPast.com is a subscription service that specializes in records from the British Isles. Another is the National Archives and Records Administration, otherwise known as NARA. NARA is the main repository for the United States federal level records, such as military records and citizenship records. Although they don't place their records available online to search, you can request and pay for copies to be sent to you. Luckily, some of their records have been made available on other websites. One of these is Fold3.com. This is a subscription service that specializes in military records and works closely with NARA. Another site that you might try is Findagrave.com. This is a free site available for finding cemetery records. Volunteers from all over the country, and in some cases all over the world, have gone through cemeteries and transcribed the information from headstones and made them available freely online. This is a great way to find out where your ancestors are buried and maybe to get additional information such as birth and death dates. Newspapers.com is a subscription service that has newspapers available. Newspapers are a great way for finding a lot of genealogical information. There are many different newspaper websites available. Some are subscription and some are free. For this lesson, we're only going to be using FamilySearch.org. That's because this is the largest source of freely available records, and that will allow you to quickly get started from home at no cost. As I mentioned in the previous lesson, before you can use FamilySearch, you need to create an account. They only ask for a few pieces of information, and they don't ask for a credit card or try to sell you anything. Once you've created your free account, you'll need to sign in order to access their site. This will pull up the FamilySearch homepage. Along the top of the screen, you'll see several options. Go ahead and click on Search to see the various choices for the search menu. The first one that we'll be using here is records. Once you've clicked on that, it will pull up their basic search screen. Next, you'll need to enter some information about who you're looking for. Particularly, start with their name. I'm not related to Albert Einstein, but I thought he'd be fun to use for this exercise. Next, you'll need to add some additional information in order to find the correct record, particularly if it's a common name. In this case, I've entered a birthplace of Germany, and Albert Einstein was born in 1879. I've entered a year range of 1878 to 1880 because often when a record asks for a person's age, it's put down a little bit younger or a little bit older. So it's always a good idea to use a range of 1 to 2 years on either side of the actual birth date in order to increase the odds that you find a record. Next, click on the search button. This will pull up the page of the results for the search that you entered. Each row is for a different record found that matches that information. For this exercise, we're going to look at the record in the second row. If you look to the far right, you'll see the different ways that you can view this information. At this point, you can ignore the first icon. That has to do with connecting a family tree, and we won't be talking about that in this lesson. The second icon that looks like the piece of paper with the lower right corner folded up means that there's indexed information that's been transcribed from the record. We'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. The third icon that looks like the camera means that there is an image of the original record that you can view online. If you don't see that camera, for example, in the fifth record, that means that there is no original image and you only have the transcribed information in the index. To see the record, click on the name in the row of the record that you want to look at. On the page for this record, you'll see the information from the index that I mentioned displayed here on the left. When you do a search for a record, the computer is not trying to search in the original images. Instead, someone has gone through each of these records and transcribed key pieces of information from them into an index. That is what is being searched when you look for a record. However, these indexes usually only include part of the information that might be available on that record. So if you can see the original image, it's always a good idea to look at it to see what additional information you might be able to find. Before we look at this image, I want to take a moment and mention that you can look at more information about the record set that this image comes from through the link to the record collection description. You find this by clicking on the name of the record collection. That will pull up a detailed description with information such as where this record comes from, what records are included in the set, and what are not. This can be very helpful when you're trying to evaluate the accuracy of the information and why certain records might be included or might not be there. Now let's look at the image. You can do this by clicking on the thumbnail of the image itself or the link below it that says View the original document. When it displays the image, you'll see that it's trying to show you the whole page, which often is too small to actually be able to read. In order to enlarge the image to see it clearly, you can use the toolbars to the left to increase the image size or the scroll wheel on your mouse. You can also see the indexed information from the previous page. This can be helpful if you're looking at a record that has been handwritten and you may have trouble reading some of the names or other information. If you click on the down arrow in front of the Image Index tab, that will push that information down on the page if you don't want to see it and increase the screen space for the original image. I've enlarged a portion of the page here so that you can more clearly see it. As you can see, Albert Einstein is listed on line 13. This is actually a continuous line, but I've broken it into two sections so that you can clearly read it on the screen. If I was in doubt as to whether this was the correct Albert Einstein, as you can see here, they have included the information about his occupation, and it clearly says scientist, so I know I have the right person. You may remember from the previous lesson, when we looked at an image from the 1940 census, that I mentioned that it was a good idea to look at the images of the pages before and after the page that pulls up so that you don't accidentally miss important information. This is true for any of the record set images, just in case the information continues onto the next page or onto the back of a page that you're looking at. For example, in this passenger list, the information continues from the left page over to the right page. To be able to view those images, you use the tools in the upper left corner. The left-hand arrow will take you back to the previous page, and the right-hand arrow will take you to the next page. This particular image is 205 out of 834. To go to the next page to see the next image, I click on the right arrow. That takes me to image 206, and I can continue on line 13 to see the rest of the information for Albert Einstein. Now let's return to the page that shows the results from the search that we did for Albert Einstein using his name, the country where he was born, and a year range for his birth. As you can see here, 65 records were found. That doesn't necessarily mean that all 65 are for the Albert Einstein we were searching for, or that these are all of the records that may be available for him. When you do a search with this limited amount of information, it's not unusual to have a much larger list of results, sometimes hundreds, and it may be difficult to scroll through all of them to find the person that you were looking for. Sometimes you need to add additional terms to your search in order to more closely match the person you want. For example, you can add the name of a spouse or parent in order to find records that have both of these people together in order to find the correct person. Let's see what happens if we add residence information. For years, Albert Einstein worked in Princeton University and lived in New Jersey. So if I click on residence and add the term of New Jersey, then scroll a little bit further down and click on the update button, this will rerun the search using this additional information. Often this will result in a smaller list. However, as you can see here, it actually resulted in a larger list. This is because it was looking for someone of the name Albert Einstein who is connected not only with Germany, but also an Albert Einstein connected with New Jersey. If you compare the two lists, you'll find that the second and the fourth record found in the new search did not appear in the first set of records. This is why it can be a good idea to run a search for a person more than once using different combinations of terms in order to make sure that you find all of the relevant records. Let's go back once again to those initial search results. You can choose to add additional terms, or you can also choose to restrict the results that you've already found. You can do this by scrolling a little bit further down on the page, and down on the left you'll see what are called search filters. These are categories that were found in the search results. For example, if I click on collection type, I can restrict those 65 results to just the ones that pertain to certain collection types, such as census records or passenger lists. Let's see what happens if I choose residence place. Of the 65 records, 13 of them had information about where the person was living on the record. 3 of them were in the continental Europe. 1 was in a place that they didn't have a category for. 1 was in the British Isles, and 8 were in the United States. If I choose the United States records, I'll restrict from 65 results down to the 8 that talk about an Albert Einstein residing in the United States. Now let's return to the Family Search homepage so that I can show you another way to look for records. In the previous search option, when we chose records, it was like casting a net, not knowing what records might be out there to catch. However, if you're looking for a particular piece of information, such as where and when an ancestor was married, there is another more effective way to search by using the catalog. When we click on that, it will bring up the catalog search page. In this demonstration, I'll show you how I looked for my great-grandmother's marriage record to her second husband. I know they married somewhere in Florida in the early to mid-1920s, and that the record is likely held at the county or state level. So in the place box, I'll start typing in Florida. Family Search will show you a list of options for locations that have Florida as part of the name. For the state of Florida, I'll click on United States, Florida. This will bring up a search box, which I can click, which will bring me the list of all of the record sets that Family Search has related to Florida records. These are grouped by record type. If you remember from my earlier lessons, marriage records, along with birth and death records, are usually referred to as vital records. So I'll scroll down on the page until I get to United States, Florida, vital records. And it shows me that there are 15 record sets that have this type of record related to Florida. When I click on that link, I'll see all of the names. This is only the first part of the list, but I can see toward the bottom of this section that there are 2 options that might be relevant. Florida marriages, 1830 to 1993, and marriage licenses and certificates of Florida, 1928 to 1950. If you remember, I just mentioned that they married most likely in the early to mid-1920s. So the 1928 and later set is too late for the record I'm looking for. So instead, I'll choose the first one and see what I might be able to find. When I click on that link, it will display information about that record set. Originally, these were done on microfilm, and it shows me all of the different microfilm titles for these records. However, by scrolling down below that list, I'll see that there is a link that tells me that this record set is also available online. So once I click on that link, it brings me to a search page for this particular record set. In the search boxes, I'll enter the name of my great-grandmother and her second husband. If the names were fairly common, you might want to add a bit more information in order to increase the chances of the correct record being toward the top of your results. For example, I might click on marriage and add a year range for when they were likely married. Then I'll click on search and look at my results. This shows that 17 records were found. If I had a large number and I wanted to narrow it further, I could at this point add those additional search terms. But the very first record found is the one for the correct couple. If I look at the last column for that row, I'll see that I have the option to view both the indexed information as well as an original image. Once I click on my great-grandmother's name to pull up that record, I'll see the information in the index on the left. As you can see, the date only gives a year, 1924, and not the full date. Since this has the option to see an original image, I want to click on that image to see what more detailed information I might be able to get. Once I click on that, I'll see the full record. It shows the date of 6th of March, 1924. However, this is not the actual marriage certificate. If you look closely at the wording of the document and at the more complete title at the top of the page, you'll find that this was actually an application for the marriage license and not the license itself or the marriage certificate. So now I know I need to look further to verify that they were married and exactly what date. However, this document has narrowed the field so that I now know that they married in the county of St. John's and that the marriage took place on or after the 6th of March, 1924. So now I have a starting point. As you search for records, there's some things you should keep in mind. Only a small portion of records that might be of use in your research can actually be found online. Many of them have never been digitized and may only exist in a physical repository, such as a county courthouse or an historical society. Some records have been lost over time due to situations such as possible neglect. For example, if they were stored at one time in a damp basement and developed mold, or they may have been lost in a fire or a flood, or they may even have been disposed of. Keep in mind that these records were usually created for a particular purpose, and the agency that created or stored these records may have decided they weren't of any use once that purpose was over. The record that you're looking for may never even have existed. For example, if you're looking for a birth certificate at a time where the location where the birth occurred didn't register births, then you're not going to be able to find one. In that case, you need to look for alternative sources for that particular piece of information. For example, church records or other reliable records that might contain birth information. And don't get discouraged, especially if you don't find the records that you want quickly. All genealogists run into what are called brick walls, those elusive ancestors whose records are very difficult to find. You just keep going, and the longer you do genealogy, the more skills you do develop, and the more records you learn about, you can often eventually get through those brick walls. This leads us to our next exercise. Identify a person from your pedigree chart, particularly someone who was in the United States in 1940 or before. This will increase the odds that you'll be able to find some good records for them. If you haven't been able to get that far yet on your pedigree chart, see if maybe you can find out the information about an ancestor for a spouse or a friend of yours. Or, if need be, pick someone who lived at that time who was famous, like I did in the example for Albert Einstein. Go to FamilySearch.org, click on Search, then Records. Enter the name of the person and choose a life event, for example, their birthday, and enter the location and the date range for that person. Then click on Search and look at the results that you get. If it is a large list of results, you might at that point want to add some additional information in order to narrow your search, such as the name of a spouse or a more specific location. See what records and record types are available for that person. Pick a record and look at all of the information that that record might be able to provide, particularly if it's one where you can see an original image. Next time, in Lesson 5, our last lesson, we'll look at how to start putting some of the pieces of our research together and where to go from there.